Welcome to session number 12 of the BBC Bible Institute, fall semester 2016. This is Old Testament survey. We're in the Poetical books. We will be picking up the book of Ecclesiastes for this session. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Remember those who are in revival effort. And I know our brother's going on his mission trip here in a couple of weeks. And we'll be praying for him and safe travel. The Lord will give fruitfulness for that trip, for that endeavor. And any other object of prayer? Anyone? Brother William?
My uncle, he's in the hospital. They're looking to have surgery.
All right. Anything else?
My mom, Teresa, she's real sick right now. Got pneumonia again.
Oh, my.
I just want to thank the Lord for all He's done for me this week.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
I had a special object last week concerning somebody's health. It was actually my daughter, my youngest one. She got a good report on Friday, so
Amen.
we're really praising the Lord for that. And I've got a special object for my son. He really needs their prayers to the Lord to intervene in his life very soon.
Amen. Amen. Let's pray. Father, you know the needs. God, you are able to intervene. Lord, we do ask you that in our lives that we would allow you to direct us in every phase of our life. Father, give us wisdom, and as people watch our lives, may there be something about us that they would desire to live in a Christ-like way. I know you're the great physician. I know that you give salvation. I know that you're God of the future, you're God of the present, and you can do all things. And we ask you concerning these needs. We do pray for our nation at the present time. Oh, that we might realize our sinful state. And God, we know that the promise of 2 Chronicles 7:14 is still in the Bible. Lord, if your people is called by your name, Lord, if we would get serious, if we pray and confess our sin, we turn from our wicked ways, God, we know you'd heal our land. You promised that you would. And Father, we know that's the ultimate healing that we need. And help us as your church. We know that evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. But we know the church is a light in a dark world. Father, these needs, and we know there's unspoken needs, we bring before you tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Last week in the book of Proverbs, for the last 2 weeks, we talked about several themes. Actually, we gave you about 11. And I suppose you could list a couple of themes in the book of Proverbs. We tried to show you a lot of verses and different things that you might encounter. When we ended, we said there was what was referred to as the numerical Proverbs. Where would you find that? Proverbs chapter 6 and also Proverbs chapter 30, right? These 6 things doeth the Lord hate. Then in Proverbs 30 last week, I showed you several things as I gave you that. And as the book of Proverbs ended, we didn't have time to go into it. We're going to move on to Ecclesiastes. But there's some good information there on page 139 and 140 and about the virtuous woman. There on page 140 said, Mizra's far above rubies, lives at godly house, the way of holiness, blessing town. The house is built on the rock of ages, over which the way of holiness runs, leading to the celestial city. You can read the rest of that. I thought that's a pretty good poem, pretty good writing there relating to that chapter. Many times folk turn back to that at Mother's Day, or maybe that a godly lady has passed on, and it's very good. All right, with our Bibles open to the book of Ecclesiastes and our textbook, page 143. This being the 12th session, that means that 4 more after this one, and we'll soon be ending for this semester. So all procrastinators, take note. You're getting way behind. So hope you will be catching up. One more test, and we'll be back 2 weeks after this, then Thanksgiving, then 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, and we'll be ending. So makes it easier for you, makes it easier for the teachers and everyone if everybody stays up with their work. So we trust that you will. We do understand that many are working a job, and some are working a job, pastoring a church, and trying to go to school too, and trying to meet the needs of their family and spend time with their family. And I realize it's a full load, but do the best you can and try to stay up and try to be disciplined. All right, the book of Ecclesiastes. This is another writing of Solomon. There's really no debate. On page 143, he said he had read some of the different ideals about that maybe another author, but it's very clear that is the writings of Solomon. Here we find the fourth book in the Poetical books, and Ecclesiastes, he mentions there at the top of the page in the first paragraph, comes from the Latin form of the Greek word for preacher. But we know that Ecclesiastes comes from the word ecclesia, or some might pronounce it ecclesia. Here we say Ecclesiastes. And this is the word that's used for the New Testament church. And what is that meaning? The called out assembly. The called out assembly. So here we find it refers to the speaker, the debater, before and assembly. If I were to ask you what the word Ecclesiastes means, and actually it would mean all three. He is the one that's giving forth his sermon, his teaching, and so it has reference to that. The debater and the assembler, the preacher. All right, I believe that a good key verse would probably be 2:11. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on all the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. There was no profit under the sun. And as we look at this, we do note that he talks about the theme of this being what is the chief good, or we could just say vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities. What is the chief good, or vanity of vanities? On page 163, if you want to turn there just a moment, he actually lists his 10 vanities throughout the book. 10 vanities throughout the book. And you can look at those later in your own time and in your own study. And what about vanity? Notice there the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And vanity referring to empty, void, vain, no purpose. That's what vanities means. Sometimes we refer to some people like they're so vain. That is, they seek after the things that really are no avail, that doesn't mean anything, trivial, worldly things, and they're vain people. Jesus Christ, he preached verily, verily, truly, truly, not vanity, vanities. He preached truth and let it stand as truth. He preached the realities of realities, and this is what we have. And we might say, well, what's Ecclesiastes about anyway? Well, many times he'll say there's no profit under the sun. Is life worth living? By the way, we are in a society of suicides. There's a search for satisfaction. What is the chief good? All of these things, they come up. But as we said, the theme, what is the chief good, or vanity of vanities? He said, what profit is there under the sun? Well, nothing lasting, but there's eternal dividends in the S-O-N, the Lord Jesus. And men should seek true happiness in God. Some words that come up again and again in the book of Ecclesiastes: the word man 47 times, vanity 37 times, labor 36 times, under the sun 30 times, evil 22 times. He talks about wisdom and the wise. That lets you know what he's referring to. Now, Solomon is the author. Look, if you would, at verse 1, verse 12. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So who is that? That's Solomon. There's no doubt about that. Verse 12, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Look at verse 16. I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. And he was the wisest of all men. In the book of Proverbs, we took the time to go back to when Solomon obtained his wisdom from the Lord, and when his wisdom came to him. So he was a very wise man, and that also indicates that it was Solomon. Chapter 2 and verse 9. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. There was no kingdom that excelled Solomon's kingdom. In the history of that time, there was none at all. And Ecclesiastes, I'll say some things about Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is an autobiography of Solomon's life when he was away from God. Now, we'll clarify that as we go along. It is an inspired record of failure and pessimism. He talks about pessimism on over in the next chapter, and skepticism. And I'll also throw in fatalism there in chapter 3. Now Solomon, he's trying to examine life and the profit of life. And, God didn't mean for that. Our full satisfaction in life is the Lord and living for Him. And when we come to a great experiment of life, what makes life worth living, it'll all turn out to be a failure. And so he's got his focus off of God, and he even tells us by experience all the things that he tried, and it failed. We've been through the book three times, preaching in our church, actually dealing with it on the radio broadcast, verse by verse, through the 12 chapters. And one thing that I've found is he will take you, now he'll say vanity of vanities, life's not worth living. He even tells us in chapter 2, I hated life. But he's going to bring us back to God. He's going to bring us back to God. Now, we do find it's, you could say it's a textbook of philosophy without God. But apart from God, man's best is vanity. That's so true. Apart from God, life may be full of weariness and disappointment. Apart from God, you might could say that you might come to the conclusion that life isn't worth living. It is a favorite book of the agnostics and the cults. The agnostics will use the scripture, and so will the atheists and others. They love that part where that Solomon said, that a beast and man, they come to the same end. They love that part. You probably remember Brother Wilson 2 or 3 weeks ago when he was teaching that when he was a young preacher, he was going to teach the book of Ecclesiastes to some other young people. Then his pastor told him, no, you're not. And because he said, you're not ready for that yet. And people need to approach this book in the right way. Somewhat like the book of Job, when you get into those discussions of those friends of Job. If you don't understand what's going on, you'll grab some things from their discussion and you'll misapply it. Same thing in the book of Ecclesiastes. You need to know how he's dealing and where he's coming from. You need to understand that. They like this. A favorite book of the agnostics and the cults, they refer to isolated verses, and they try to teach that when man dies, he's just no different than an animal. They'll try to teach there's no life after death. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. and also life is unfair, and fatalism, and all these things they can try to project. Now, here we find that God's truth is recorded of man's arguments, in particular Solomon's, and he has a pessimistic view. We'll notice in the textbook how he lays out the book, but I want to give you this little outline that I was given when I went to school, and I think it's pretty good. It always helped me to approach the book of Ecclesiastes. And Roman numeral 1, problem stated. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. Problem stated. What is the problem? Vanity of vanity. No profit under the sun. Life's not worth living. The problem is stated. All right, 1, verses 1 through 11. Roman numeral 2. You like these short outlines, don't you? Problem studied. 1:12 through 12:8. 1:12 through 12:8. Problem stated, problem studied, problem solved. Roman numeral 3. Problem solved, chapter 12, 9 through 14. Listen to what he says. And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yea, he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words. That which was written was upright, even words of truth. And he goes on down to verse 13, 14. Here's what he said. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. What's he been saying? Vanity of vanities. What profit is there under the sun? Let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment and every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Problem stated. 1 through 11. Problem studied. 1:12 through 12:8. Problem solved. Chapter 12, 9 through 14. 9 through 14. All right, now go back to your textbook, if you will, just a moment. And we're going to note, actually, we're going to note there on pages 145, 46. He talks about the first 2 chapters, and actually this is in the blocked out outline. Now this is his outline on page 148. He is studying by personal experiment. He says chapter 1 and 2. And that is true. And then he said he's dividing the book by general observation. And there's nothing wrong with the outline here. I'm not indicating there is, but I just gave you that little short outline that I always set to memory. And he's making general observation, and then he said the quest by practical morality, and then the quest reviewed and concluded. All right, that is his approach in the book. But if I ask you for an outline back on test, I'll ask you for the simple one, for the short one. Problem stated, problem studied, problem solved. Let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Now let's notice in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, as we've already said, this is Solomon, and he's the preacher. My text today is vanity of vanities. Life's just not worth living. Sounds like a good sermon. And so he starts out, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he hath taken under the sun? One thing we're going to note when we get on into chapter 2, he's got a problem, and God has blessed him, the greatest kingdom of all the earth. And he has labored, and he's been diligent. God has blessed him, but he himself also has been diligent. But he's worrying about who he's going to leave it to. It's bad to work this hard and try to be wise with your life, and some fool will end up with what you got. All right. Now, notice what he said. What profit is there? You know what he seems to say, first of all? And he's saying, you know what? Life is just a continual cycle. It's just the cycles. He begins to study it. And one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. And if Jesus doesn't come, we'll pass. There'll be a generation to follow us. And the earth will pretty well remain the same as it's been for the last few centuries. That is true. And notice he's saying, you know what? Life's just a revolving cycle. And then he refers to the sun. The sun also ariseth, the sun goeth down, hasteth to his place where he arose. By the way, the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. It's always been doing that. There's a cycle. Then he said, the wind goeth toward the south and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. Those who study, the meteorologists, those who've studied weather, the scientists in the past years, they made great discoveries that the winds blow according to certain patterns. Well, he's already said that. What's he saying? Just like the sun, just like the winds. And all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea's not full. And unto the place from which the rivers come, thither they return again. And I guess our school teachers taught his students evaporation, condensation, all of that. Well, that's somewhat what he's saying right here. So he's talking about the cycles, whether it's the sun, whether it's the wind currents and patterns, whether it's that of the cycle of evaporation, condensation, and all of this. And what's he saying all of that for? Life's just a cycle. That's all it is. Really? Is that all life's about? We're here, we die, we're gone, somebody else takes our place. So when he starts out, you'll say, yeah, he's away from God. He's not exalting the Lord right here, the life that's in God. He's not right now praising God for his mercies and his grace. And he's just looking at life from man's perspective. And all things are full of labor, man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done, that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. And this is what he's talking about. There's nothing new. It's still the same old cycle, the same old monotone life. And you won't be remembered. There's no remembrance of the former things. And there's not going to be any remembrance of the things that are to come. There'll be the cycle. It'll come, it'll go, it'll be gone, and it's forgotten. And sounds sort of depressing, doesn't it? What he says. I, the preacher, was king over Jerusalem. And notice, I gave my heart to seek and to search out. This is the second part of the outline, the problem studied. He said, I gave my heart. He introduces somewhat his sermon, his thoughts, his text, and then he said, I gave myself to search this out. And as the textbook said, that certainly he did by experiment of different things. And so what does he say? I've seen all the works that are done under the sun, and it's all vanity. I've not really seen anything that satisfied me. And you really won't. Now, God gave us life. Jesus said, I came to give life and life more abundant. There can be abundant life on the earth. But as far as having satisfaction in what you've seen, you won't. The crooked cannot be made straight. I communed with my heart, and that was his problem. He should have been communing with God. Verse 16. Lo, I am come to great estate, and I have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. I gave my heart to know wisdom. Certainly he was commended for his wisdom. But he's taking the wisdom that he has and trying to find an answer for everything about life And if he had the answer, I don't know that he'd be any better off, or if we would. And then we note in chapter 2, I said in my heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. I'll seek pleasure. Many folk are doing that today. I'll seek mirth, enjoy pleasure, and what I find out, no satisfaction. You know, when we do things, and there's nothing wrong with pleasure, nothing wrong with clean, wholesome pleasure in your life and with your family and enjoying that and one another. But you know, people that are just in this thing of pleasure, there always has to be a bigger event to top the last one. Seeking that. And so, we do that. I mean, we sit in the sports world, even here locally. And, of course, I know why they did it. It was money. And, said, well, they're going to play a football game over at the racetrack. And everybody was excited to death. Well, I think it was the same type of football game they played in the Coliseum, that Neyland Stadium. And because there was so many at a college game. One event's got to top another one. And that's in all areas of life. They're seeking that. Big part of it's money, and then people, they fall for it. They think they're going to get a drive, a satisfaction out of that. They're going to get on a high with that. But it always takes something bigger. But when we get our life where it ought to be with the Lord, it's enough. It's just a day-to-day walk of pleasure and satisfaction, walking with the Lord. Well, he sought to give himself the wine, and that didn't work. And notice verse 4, I made me great works. I builded me houses, planted vineyards, gardens, orchards, trees, made me pools of water to water therewith the wood. I mean, he had irrigation systems. You read over in the Kings about Solomon's reign, and in the Chronicles, he had 2 navy of ships. He imported the peacocks and exotic animals. I mean, his kingdom is something to read about. And when the Queen of Sheba came, she said, the half's not been told. She's seen all that he had, but what overwhelmed her was his wisdom and his ascent to the house of God. But here he's telling us there was a time that I thought there was satisfaction in these things. And so I made all these, and I had servants, maidens, men servants, even born in my house. I gathered silver and gold, verse 8. I had my own entertainers. I had my singers. I mean, I had folk to entertain me. I had banquet halls. I had everything. Think about this. And then notice, so was I great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. Now you remember when this thing started, when Solomon brought the great offering. Remember that? The great sacrifice. And God asked him what his desire was. And his desire was for wisdom to lead the people of God. God said, you didn't ask for wealth. You didn't ask for long life. You didn't ask to conquer your enemy. But I'm going to add these things besides. God did add wealth. And here's what he said. And this is hard to believe for some. And whatsoever mine eye desired, I kept not from them. There's nothing wrong with having things if things don't have you. Nothing wrong with possessing things just so things aren't possessing you. All right? And so whatever I wanted, I had it. But did that bring him satisfaction? When I looked at it, I always said, what's the chief good? No satisfaction, no profit in this. And so I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought. We go on down, and he said, I turned, and all of this is madness and folly. And he said in his heart, verse 15, so it happened even to me, as it happened to the fool. He's bringing us down to this part that, we're going to die and we're going to leave it. Notice what he said in verse 17, therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought on the Son is grievous unto me. It's grievous unto me. One of the deacons, where Brother Forbes pastored, I always remember him telling me several years ago, as a young preacher, he said, I've found out that we can become a slave to what we've got. And you can get on that borderline. You got so many things, and it totally consumes you and you're totally occupied with things, trying to maintain your things that you do have. And you become a slave to it, you become a servant to it, instead of it being a joy for you. So we've got to be wise enough to know there's a line, there's a place we come to. We say, now wait a minute, am I getting out of balance? Am I just wanting this accumulation and a new adventure in life to make my life enjoyable? If we are, we need to stop and say, wait a minute, my joy ought to be in the Lord. That ought to be what's consuming me. And then he talked about hating all of his labor under the sun, and just as I mentioned a few moments ago, notice on down to verse 20 and 21, he talks about, and who knoweth whether, yea, I hate all my labor, verse 18, that I take another son, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he be a wise man, whether he will be a fool. So that's bothering him. That is bothering him. And by the way, many times some folk have so much it creates a lot of problems by the ancestors that are left behind, trying to divide it, and many of them are fighting over it. So he said all of this was a grief and vexation of spirit, but he said there's nothing better, verse 24, that a man, that he should eat, drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. He said, if the Lord will let you enjoy what he has allowed you to have, that is a blessing. That is a blessing to see. And so he talks about the things that we have, and actually continues on with this. That's in chapter 2. But now let's come to chapter 3. And here we're going to border on fatalism. We're going to border on fatalism. And I always say this, and it's not that you can't use it. I'm not saying it's wrong to use it. But so many times at a funeral, Job 14:1, man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Now we've just come through the book of Job. Why did Job say that? You know what he was going through, don't you? But now what did Jesus say? What did Jesus say? I came to give life, and I came to give it more abundantly. We've got to be careful how we project things. Well, here's the brother. We're trying to comfort the family. We're sorry that he's gone on. But you know what the Bible said. Man, born of woman, he's a few days and full of trouble. You just hear a little while. You can really just expect one trouble after another. Then they turn to Ecclesiastes 3. And they get over into fatalism. To everything there's a season, and that is true, and a time to every purpose. But you got to see his mindset as you're coming through chapter 1, chapter 2. It's not that he is giving us some great discovery of truth. For all we know, there is a season for things, all things in life. There's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, and so forth. And you can read all of those. And if we're not careful, and I'm saying this as servants of the Lord, as ministers, as you go through school, you're learning the context of the Scripture. You're learning what this is about. You can use that, but be careful how you apply it and do it. So if you want to read Job 14:1, Well, his days was short. His days was full of trouble. And, well, after all, it's fatalism. Whatever will be, will be. And, you roll the dice and your number didn't come up and now you're gone. There's time to be born, a time to plant, a time to love, and a time to hate, and a time to die. Well, this fella, it was his time to die, is all I can say. That's not too much comfort. I've never felt like it was. I've never felt like it gave too much comfort for the family, and I've never really felt like, and you can use it to instruct people to be ready to die, because there is a time to die. But what I'm trying to say, and what I went on with for the last 5 minutes, is be careful how you use these scriptures. Be wise. Be a wise servant of the Lord, how you use these scriptures. All right, and he went on to say, I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of man to exercise thereby. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Verse 11. Also he hath set the world in their hearts, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from beginning to the end. And most of the time man gets sidetracked by the things of the world. And if we notice, he seems to be saying that there's no purpose, there's fatalism, all is fatalism. We see its doctrine. The doctrine of fatalism is this, that all things happen by irresistible necessity, overruling all things. So that's somewhat what he's saying in these verses. Now, I'm not saying this is not inspired. I'm not saying it's not good. But where's Solomon at? He's saying, I looked at life, and life was vain. I'm looking for this perspective. But the further we go into chapters, the more he's going to bring you back to God. Now notice in verse 16 and 17 of that chapter, and moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. So there was wickedness in the place of judgment, and iniquity in the place of righteousness. We know there's corruption today in the judicial system. We know that there's moral perverseness in religion. He said, I examined that. So I said in my heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, that they might see that they themselves are beasts. And so he said, and he's giving us a truth here, that man left alone, he's like the beast. He'll be impartial in his judgment. He'll be unfair. He'll be wicked in his judgment. And even in his religion, there'll be moral perverseness. And now he uses that verse 19, and this is the verse that we're talking about, that the agnostics like, and the critics they like. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts. Even one thing befalleth them, as one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breast, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. Can't you see how an agnostic would take that verse, and you're trying to witness to him? He's smart enough, and he said, let me read you something in the Bible. You don't even know it's there. He said, let me read you this verse in your Bible that you claim is so great and wonderful. Your Bible just said a beast and a man, they go to the same place. Well, the body does. And he will make it clear, and all go into one place. All are the dust, and all turn to dust again. He'll say that again at the end of the chapter. But notice he said, the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of beast that goeth downward. Here he makes a distinction. And the man returns to dust from whence he came, and his spirit goes to be with the Lord. All right. Now he goes into chapter 4. And he's talking about oppression. He starts talking about oppression in this. And as he divided the book, and he started in chapters 3 and 4, he says he made general observation in 3, 4, and 5. But actually, as we've showed you, chapter 3 is somewhat, he's leaning toward fatalism. But notice the oppression here that he talks about. Talks about the oppression. Is life worth living? Is life worth living when we consider its problems? So he's tried everything, pleasures, possessions. But what about life's problems? When there's so many problems in life, isn't life vain? So I returned and considered all the oppression that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. And so oppressed means the burden, to crush by hardship and severity. He said the oppressions were many, they were painful, and the oppressor seemed to be the one that had the power. The one being oppressed seemed to have no comfort. Wherefore I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. He said, oppression, I'm praising those that are dead. You'd be better off to be dead. So the oppressed are helpless and they're in their misery. Now, we do have help from God. The Bible makes that very clear. And I've got several verses wrote down here that talks about God being our help. God being our comforter during these times. So he's taken us down this course. And I praise the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. Yea, better is he than both they which hath not been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. He's saying, be better off than to go through all these problems in life, not to even be born. And then in verses 4 through 6, he talks about again the opportunities of man's labors. And there is a resentment of righteous labors. I considered all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity. And he talks about it's better to have a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. And that is true. See, he tried all of these possessions before. And then he goes on to talk about the opportunities that are compared, how the fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. And then he goes on to discuss, starting in verse 8, he talks about the vanity of life being lived alone, verses 7 through 14. There is one alone, there is not a second. And he talks about that. Two are better than one, and so forth. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe unto him that is alone. And that's good. So he's began to get us back on the right track. He's began to get us back the direction that we need to go. He's beginning to take us to the point. We've seen these vanities. We've seen these oppressions. We've looked at what profit is there under the sun. And now he's going to take us down a path where we learn to make life worth living. Chapters 1 through 4, he was looking at life's loss and emptiness in a worldly view. And when we come to chapter 5, and as he ends chapter 4, he did, and actually he's going to give us some things that he has learned, and I believe his attitude begins to change here. I told you at the beginning, if you do study or teach through this book or preach through this book, you will see that as the chapters progress. He drives us from the world and its vanity and drives us to God and our duty. All right, look at, he talks about divine worship, coming to the house of God. And to some people it's vanity because it's empty and to no purpose. Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God. Be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. He said you ought to be ready to listen to God. You know, there's some folk that they seem to know more than God does. What is our coming to the house of God, our approach? Keep thy foot, guard thy steps. That is, you ought to come with all respect and reverence. You ought to come with a realization that it is a place of worship. It is a place of instruction to be heeded. Be not rash with thy mouth. Let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon the earth. Therefore let thy words be few. Don't be hasty. Listen. God will tell you something. God will help you. He's tried all these other things, but be ready. Don't be rash. Don't be impulsive. Don't be quick to speak when you haven't come to a full realizations. Our cautions when we come to the house of God, if we have a rash mouth that's hasty and hurtful, we have a wrong spirit, there's no love involved. Our heart is hasty before God. But God's in heaven. God's the infinite God. We're the finite on the earth. God is high and holy. We're just earth dwellers that have received the grace and the mercies of God. And so don't be hasty in your words. And then he's going to lead us into this about making a vow before God. And maybe not keeping your vow as you should. Into verse 5, he tells us this. A vow is a certain promise or a pledge. And he is, I've heard a lot of folk, and I understand he's getting into certain things that they vowed unto the Lord, they were to bring to the temple and so forth. But there's a lot of people that's made a lot of vows of saying that they would do this and that and the other, and that they would serve God, and that they would live for the Lord. But did they keep their promise? No. And when thou vowest a vow to God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. That's good advice. Neither say thou therefore before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands? And so he's telling us that we are to be careful in this. All right. And then he talks about the vanity of desiring vengeance to get even with in verse 8 and 9. Not to be involved, in that. And then he goes on to talk about verses 10 through 20 of those, the vanity of desiring well. So chapter 5, when you read it, as you end chapter 4, you go into chapter 5, it's easy to see that he's now going in a different direction. He will come back again to some of these vanities. But he will bring us to chapter 12 when he says, let's hear the conclusion. And by the way, the conclusion wasn't very long. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of men. All right, we'll stop right there, and you're dismissed.